Okay, so welcome everyone. Today's topic is going to be Earth Day 2022. Earth Day was actually yesterday, and it's always on the 22nd of April. But since our sessions are always on Saturday nights, I just, said, well, we'll do it tomorrow night. But the topic is Earth Day in keeping with the Earth Day celebration of yesterday. So we'll get to that in a moment, but first we'll do the news as usual. So the James Webb Space Telescope, the MIRI instrument is finally at its critical temperature. It's down to 7 Kelvin. But it turns out that that's because it has its own dedicated cryocooler. But there are other parts of the telescope that have yet to get down to their final temperature, namely the mirror segments and the secondary mirror. Now, you'd think that, well, they've had a whole lot longer period of time to cool down, but apparently not. They've got a few more kelvins to reduce by before we can start doing capturing for real. Since I'm on the notifications list for the upcoming first public release of images, I got access to the approved scientific observations list. So when there's something like the Webb, as scientists, you have to put proposals together and say, please, may I use your instrument? You select what instrument you want. You select what the celestial object is, why you're doing it, what kind of data you expect to get from it, and you throw it into a hat. And then a bunch of people at the Space Telescope Science Institute rummage through them all and go, oh, that sounds interesting. And then they throw them all into a piece of software that, based upon the orbit of the Webb telescope, it picks which ones can be seen when, because remember, it can't see everywhere in the sky all at once. And it can't stare backwards at the sun or anything like that. So what you want to look at has to be in a certain part of the sky at a certain point during the year in order to get your observing request approved. And they've approved, I think it's about 50 observation requests for what they call cycle 1. That's just the first batch that they're going to be doing. And they've broken that down further into the ones they're going to do initially for calibration purposes, which they might get some science from it. Then the ones that will be the targets that show up first based upon the Space Telescope's current orbital status. And then if there's any conflict that, well, they both want to use MIRI at the same time, then it's a matter of which one has priority as a committed amount of observations for a particular scientific research project. So if you have a project that is NASA funded or ESA funded or CSA funded, and you have a limited window on your funding, then you get a little boost in priority over somebody who's just going, well, I'm a professional scientist and I'd like to find out information about this. I don't need a separate funding for it. I just need time and instrument access. So you'll get down a little further in the priority queue. But I'm already in email communication with all of the first image presenting folks that have already been confirmed by Space Telescope Science Institute, all of the ones in the Florida area. So there's a person that coordinates all of that. There won't be a subject matter expert this time during our sessions. It'll just be me. I'm trying to get all of the advanced data on what they plan to take a look at first for their public images. Don't have that data yet, but they're saying it should be available in mid-May. I look at it as, if you've already confirmed which projects are going to use the instrument when, you should be able to tell us right now, what you're going to be showing first. But they don't want your average YouTubers jumping the gun, so they're going to hold off until mid-May before they tell us, and then the public release will be sometime in the mid-June to mid-July timeframe. I just want to get our content done and sort of be out there when the public release occurs with all of the minutiae that everyone wants to hear about. So I don't know if you've been watching the shuffling of launches and landings and recoveries and such, but the AX-1, the Axiom, this is the first truly commercial capsule docking at the ISS. They had 3 paying customers and 1 Axiom hired astronaut that was the commander of the mission. And so they're planning to start back tomorrow. They'll undock tomorrow. I think it's around 6 p.m. And then they'll head back to Earth. And in the realm of unmanned things, the Lucy Asteroid mission going to the asteroids about Jupiter. It had a problem. It's been launched. It's moving through space. And they went to deploy the solar arrays. The solar arrays are like giant round petals. So they unfold kind of like a fan. And one of the 2 panels opened just fine. The other panel almost got fully open, and then it just stopped. They don't know why. They can't, like, take a look at it and see what's going on. They need those selfie cams, yeah. But anyway, they're about to do a burn with the rocket motor to do a course correction that they have to do, and they don't want the second solar array to not be fully tensioned, so it's kind of floppy. And they're going to once again try and fully open it or get it at least under tension, if not locked back. It's open at 345 degrees out of 360. So it's pretty open. And they're saying that even with the first one fully open and the second one only open to 345 degrees, that's more than enough electricity for the mission. They just don't want it flopping around when they go to fire up the engine for their course correction. And although it didn't complete every test, it failed on a few. The Artemis 1 rocket, the SLS, with its Orion spacecraft dummy load on the top, will be going back to the vertical assembly building for analysis and repair. Now, if you know how SpaceX does this, if they have issues with a launch vehicle, they don't just fix the broke. They go back and tear it all down and build a better one. But there's no budget money for that, so they'll roll Artemis 1 back to the VAB and fix what they can fix of it, and then later this year roll it back out again to try another unmanned launch of it. I should think they have to do another wet dress rehearsal because they could not fill the rocket. They could not fill all the tanks of the rocket to the maximum pressure. So they still haven't done a full pressure test on it. And this one, I'm sort of, I might, if I have some spare time, do some investigation on it. The masked Z-cam on the Perseverance rover on Mars pointed up at the sun just in time to see one of the 2 moons of Mars, Phobos, passing in front of the sun. So it got a partial solar eclipse from the perspective of Mars. The Mastcam is the camera used for taking wide field views when the rover is rolling around so it can see the upcoming terrain. Think about it this way. Mars is further away from the sun than the Earth is. Therefore, the sun will be much smaller in the sky. Phobos is, I think, only around 8 miles across, so it's very tiny, but it's in very low orbit around Mars, so it'll show up large. But I'd like to see the original imagery to see, how many pixels did they actually capture versus how many they had to crop. I'm not saying NASA faked it. I'm just saying I'd be very interested to see how they repurpose the camera to do this, because it has to know when to point it to sun, track the sun, do still captures because it's not a video camera, do still captures, and then create a video from that. So it'll be interesting analysis. And the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider over at CERN and the EU is once again fired up after a few years of downtime. Some of it COVID, some of it repair, some of it is improving certain instruments, but they've already started it up. They're going to be doing, I guess, what they call Mission 3. And they're going to be able to have higher levels of energy per proton-proton collision. And they're going to be able to have more protons colliding over a period of time. So higher levels of energy and more collisions, more data. And I did get one of the in the queue videos posted to our YouTube site, the one on extraterrestrial environments. And I just posted it the other day and already there's 7 views on it. So somebody's out there watching us. So our initial James Webb Space Telescope presentation from December 13th of last year has now had 1,035 views and 12 likes.
12 likes, I think, is us.
Now, if there were only 12 views, I'd say that's us, but 12 likes? I think there's 1 or 2 there from the 1,000+ people that viewed it. And we've got 188 people that have looked at the EM drive and photonic propulsion. 54 people looked at Stop Looking for ET. So we're starting to get some attention.
I'm impressed that EM drive has more than the ET one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, people see EM drive and all the conspiracy theories come out of the woodwork and want to see it.
Monroe,
Yeah.
you should go on the description of the video and hashtag UFO and hashtag UAP to see if you can better the numbers.
Yeah, but neither one of those has to do with EM drive and photonic propulsion. Or are you referring to Stop Looking for ET?
Yes.
Okay, well, it's got 4 likes. 4 out of 54 versus 12 out of 1,035.
You can count 3 because one of those it's me.
Yeah, I know. We're a slow grow. I'm not monetizing the channel, so it's not really important if all of a sudden we have, you know, 1,000 more views of the Webb telescope.
Most of the people who I follow, they say that if you go organic, it takes 5 years.
Yes. I still think that it's a matter of our videos are too long. People lose attention after maybe 30 minutes, and we've got videos out there that are 1 hour to 2 hours long. Okay. Any other news items or comments on the news? Anything that I missed that people found interesting? There was a Hubble Space Telescope image of 2 colliding galaxies, but that was taken a couple of years ago. If you go back and look in the archives of HST, you'll find it. But nowhere in the article that was released this week did they say when they took the images. So they're just trying to stay popular. So good evening once again. Tonight's topic is Earth Day 2022. Yes, we're doing this a day late, hopefully not $1 short. Earth Day is always celebrated on April 22nd, and in 2022 that fell on a Friday, yesterday. But our weekly sessions are on Saturday evening, so we're doing this the day after Earth Day. Doing it last Saturday for Earth Day for this Friday was a little too far in advance, so we'll do it a day after. So think about Earth Day as our consideration for the continued habitability of the only planet on which the human species can currently exist, and it should be a priority for every day of the year, not just on Earth Day. I know there are other more immediately urgent considerations happening in other countries, but there's several billion people on this planet, and there should be enough people to work, you know, to spin more than one plate at a time. So Earth Day was started in 1970 as an annual way of demonstrating support for environmental protection. It was the brainchild of Gaylord Nelson, who was a Democratic U.S. Senator from Wisconsin. Yes, Wisconsin had a Democratic senator at one time. And later he was the governor of Wisconsin. Earth Day nowadays is celebrated worldwide. It's no longer US only. For 2022, I looked up on the site, the earthday.org site, and there were 190 countries that had multiple celebrations in their countries for Earth Day 2022. But if you ever want to look it up, it's just earthday.org. Most people will associate Earth Day with the Environmental Protection Agency. And they weren't, I mean, same year, 1970, but they weren't coincident with one another. The EPA was formed a little bit after coming up with Earth Day. And there was actually a Republican president in the White House at the time they came up with it, Richard Nixon. The first administrator of the EPA was William Ruckelshaus. There's a name from the past. In 2022, the EPA administrator is Michael Regan. I don't think he's any relation to the former president. And you can find the EPA website at www.epa.gov. So most people will label the people that follow things like Earth Day or the EPA as environmentalists, or more disrespectfully, tree huggers. I prefer environmentalists. An environmentalist is just a person who values and respects planet Earth, the life on it, and those natural resources upon which that life is dependent. Just think of an environmentalist as someone who understands the fragility of the continued human habitability of planet Earth, the only place where we live. It's more than just the humans on the planet. We may be one of the animals that is at the apex of the food chain, or the food pyramid of the planet, but we're not alone, and it requires many lower levels of food chain of living things, both plants and animals, in order for our continued survival. Humans are not like other animals. When we want to survive, we go in and we change things. We grow our populations beyond what might be easily sustainable, and we advance our technology. You don't normally see that in living things on this planet other than humans. Yes, birds make nests, and tortoises dig pits in the ground and bury their eggs and such, but those are not long-lasting structures. I know some birds reuse their nest, but they don't advance the technology of whatever they're building. And the large-scale impacts of humans and our industries on the planet have a negative effect on our continued habitation of the planet. So, you might say, we're doing ourselves in. Well, not initially knowingly, but as we learn more, we need to change our behavior because we are knowingly doing it now. So environmentalists need to constantly strive to repair and sustain the habitability of the planet, which is not a bad thing. We don't all have to do it, but I'm glad that there are some doing it. So why protect the environment? We can always fix stuff. We can always change stuff, make stuff up, create technology. Well, the human species has only one place of residence at the moment. It's Earth. And typically those that place the short-term financial gain over continued habitability of the planet are the ones that we'd like to hold responsible for basically who's screwing up our home. But it's something that occurs when you don't think about it. And then when you do think about it, it's a matter of getting the momentum together to make the change. But it's not just a handful of, greedy companies or greedy people. It's just the general attitude we have towards the planet. So while they care a little, but have the financial power and authority, we need to care much more to counter that. So you now have an environmentalist, but what is environmental protection? How do you protect these things? Well, you're not going to stand in front of something and stop it from happening. So what you can do is what you can do. So environmental protection takes many forms and many levels, but the first thing you have to have is a willingness to change your own behavior to lessen your impact. You don't have to do things dramatically. Every little bit helps. You might want to consider interacting with like-minded individuals so you can raise the collective impact of those trying to make things better. And when you understand the issues, try and communicate them so that others can follow what you're doing, and therefore you'll grow your efforts. And when you do realize who is protecting the environment and who is allowing it to be misused for financial gain, you want to elect the individuals that will essentially follow your cause and realize they're an authority, they can do things, maybe not instantaneously, but over time. And even Richard Nixon realized this by creating the EPA. So it doesn't need to be fully left or fully right. It can be just people in the middle doing something. Or there are people that really want to take a stand in protecting the environment, and they'll actually run for office to try and make a difference. And there are a lot of levels of office, from local communities to state to federal, that, every little bit helps. And if you're not going to be running for office, at least try and use your power of vote to elect like-minded individuals as leaders. An environmental protection activity might be something as simple as just becoming more educated to develop the requisite technologies to fix what's broken. Or you can work in government agencies that promote and assure protections. I know a number of National Park Service park rangers that are environmentalists, that are naturalists, that that's their day job. Or you can go to work in companies that create and deploy the requisite technologies, or maybe startup firms that are coming up with new technology to try and make things better. So what is our burden on Earth? This is something that people don't really want to think about, because it says you're doing something harmful to the Earth, and the whole issue of accountability comes into play. But there are billions of humans on the planet that are alive. We're all living here, and there's no doubt that increasing population is something we have to make sure that we have the resources to cover. Nobody's recommending we reduce the population count anytime soon, nor should they, unless there's a mass exodus to an equally habitable exoplanet. So once we have the ability to live in quantity in society elsewhere, that's a natural way of reducing the population density of the planet. But much like normal human behavior, once you lighten things up by people going elsewhere, we'll just fill it with more. Think about the early exploration of the planet itself. Lots of people over in Europe coming to North America, and people in North America, spreading out, occupying all the available space. So humans are an increasing and long-term environmental burden on planet Earth. It doesn't mean it's bad, it's just something to be recognized. Humans require a habitable environment. We need air to breathe, water to drink, food to eat, and we'd like to have some protection from the elements, so we need dwellings, places to live and work. We require electricity for lighting and heating and food preparation. We're mobile, so we expect various modes of transportation. So we want some paved roads and airports and seaports and all of those things. Take the green ground and cover it up with cement and asphalt, and that raises heat. Also doesn't permit water to drain into the ground so easily. We're communicative species, so we need lots of different modes of communication. So we have, landline phones, not so much anymore, but we have landline phones, wired communication, and various forms of wireless communication, from, mobile phones to Wi-Fi to, satellite internet service. So we grow all our technology to allow us to easily communicate with one another. All of these have underpinning environmental burdens. To do some of this stuff, it requires fuels to operate the machinery. It requires chemicals to make the materials or to supply them. We need power generations. We need electrical plants. Once we create a mess, we need to get rid of it. So there's sanitary sewer systems and waste disposal. When we pave over everything, we need flood control so that when it rains heavy, we can get the water off instead of it pooling. And, you know, we'll clear off forests, and that will cause its own damage. Individually, this might not be a significant burden to the planet as, you know, the environment, but collectively, this has a downward effect on the continued human habitability of planet Earth. Over time, there have been unrecognized sources of harm that we've done to the habitability of the human species on this planet. And it took us some time to figure it out, but we kept doing it for a while, like dumping unprocessed sewage into bodies of water. They did this for the longest kind of time in the Mediterranean Sea, detonating nuclear weapons in the atmosphere and in space. We branded motor fuels as ethyl because they contained tetraethyl lead as an anti-knock and fuel efficiency improvement compound. For a while, we didn't recognize the sulfur in coal and the sulfur in diesel fuels, which allowed us to have cheaper sources of manufacturing and production by consuming coal and diesel, but that was going into the atmosphere. Chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, Freon, refrigeration equipment, aerosol cans escaping into the upper atmosphere. For years, nobody thought anything about it because it was a great way to keep cool, and it was a great way to spray paint and hairspray.
By the way, there was one, I forgot the name of the scientist, but there is one scientist who is responsible for the detonation of nuclear weapons, the ethyl, and also he discovered a CFC. So he actually worked in a Manhattan Project. Yep. He did the ethyl, and then he did the CFC. So he's responsible for one of the person who most kill people on the world as him.
Yes, there was the guy that discovered all that stuff, and then there was the other guy that was working in industry to create all those wonderful solutions, and he himself was suffering from it. So the latest one is something where they've gone in and discovered in manufacturing operations that consumer products had all kinds of toxic substances in them that, you know, you're not going to eat the product and it won't kill you immediately. It just adds to the toxic buildup in human beings. So we have to get rid of those things. But the reason why we had those is they make the products look better and shinier, and you know, they could run them through manufacturing processes more efficiently because they were kind of slippery, or they had improved conductivity, and it was all great for manufacturing, but not good for us. People like environmentalists started measuring the effects that these activities were having on people and on the planets. So in Europe, they realized the levels of biological pathogens that were showing up in people who were drinking public water sources, not taps, but, you know, water fountains in public places or water fountains in public squares, that when they were drinking from them or when they were swimming in them, they would come down with bad stuff. And so they recognized that, where are these things coming from? They're bad. We got to stop them. How do we correct this? And they traced it back to the outfall of sewage into the Mediterranean Sea. They tracked worldwide increases in cancer sourced from fallout and contamination of fresh water sources. And it's surface water sources because the fallout was falling into the surface water sources but was not affecting the deep well sources. So they were measuring isotopes of cesium and strontium. And they don't kill you immediately, but they will increase the average cancer risks in the populations. So that was something else they figured out, that why are we finding this? What's the source of this? Then they made the connection between increasing lead levels in children affecting their education and also rising crime rates, because people who have their mental faculties affected tend to make bad decisions when it comes to doing criminal activity. And the increasing levels of sulfur in atmospheric samples from burning coal and diesel resulted in acid rain, which was killing off forests, predominantly in Germany because they had a lot of coal-fired power plants, and also degradation of structures. Literally, the level of acid that was in the rain was enough to dissolve marble over time. And we recognized that there was an ozone hole, and there was a general rise in UV planet-wide. The ozone holes were at the Arctic and Antarctic, and we traced those back to UV essentially breaking apart CFCs, and that basically consuming, not destroying, but consuming ozone, which was something we need to protect us from UV. And then by measuring general population blood supply, blood samples, they discovered all of these toxic chemicals from manufacturing operations in people. So we have to stop that. I thought this was interesting. If you look at the history of Benjamin Franklin, you'll find that he was one of the first people to recognize lead is not good for you. So he was the first, because he was in printing, and printing used leaded type. So they were looking for alternatives to lead that, wouldn't be affecting people. But when they
also had knowledge of the intoxication of the Greeks and the Romans.
Yeah, but when they found out that lead was bad for you, nobody in the government at the time wanted to take any action that would stem the use of lead, because lead was so valuable to business. So he came up with the quote, "You will observe with concern how long a useful truth may be known and exist before it is generally received and practiced upon." So in other words, we didn't know what we were doing. We learned what we were doing. We said we need to stop this, and nobody wanted to stop it because the living was easy and the money was good.
How did he know lead was bad?
We have historical data from the intoxication of the Romans and also the Greeks. It was known for more than 2,000 years that lead was bad.
We knew that the normal food preparation practices of the Romans, long about Nero's time, were basically you take the vinegar from wine that's gone bad, and you mix that in cooking vessels that were made from lead, because that was easy to shape and was durable enough over a low flame that it would you could cook your food in that, and the combination of the lead with the acid from the vinegar of the spoiled wine would make the food taste sweet. And there were many thousands of times the normal lead levels that people were consuming back then. But it was strange that this particular food process was something only the wealthy could afford to do, because they had access to the resources and the long-term storages of wine that hasn't gone bad, and they had people that were dedicated to cooking for them. So all they did was eat it all day long. And some suspect that that's why Nero was a bit cuckoo, was from consuming all that lead. So by the time Ben Franklin came around, it was generally realized that if you want to lose your mental faculties, the amount of lead in your normal environment, particularly in consumed food, because that will be digested and get into your bloodstream really quickly. Not good for you. The lead levels in children came from two sources. One was the lead in gasoline. The second one was lead in paint.
Monroe, can I read a paragraph of about the question about the historic, where it come from? I found something interesting.
Sure. Tell me the source and then read it.
So it's a biologicaldiversity.org. This is the early history of plumbic intoxication. So lead toxicity was recognized and reported as early as 2000 BC. And the widespread use of lead has been cause of endemic chronic plumbism in several societies through history. The Greek philosopher Nicander of Colophon in 250 BC reported on colic and anemia resulting from lead poisoning. Hippocrates related gout and of food and wine through the same association. So it's kind of it's been about more than 2,000 years that we know about that.
Yep. But still, they did bad things with gasoline, even though they knew that. And that's where it gets back to Ben Franklin's quote, even though you know it, even though you know it's bad for you, how long is it going to take before you generally are aware of it in the general population and you change your practices? Even though you have some people in a society that generally recognize the problem, what can you do about it? So everyone drinks the water. Most people swim in the water. People were getting sick, sort of across all populations. Radioactive substances increase cancer risks, and since it's fallout, it's going to affect everyone. Children breathe the air, eat the paint, and the lead affects their mental faculties. And you can study things like crime rates over time and realize that as lead was increasing in burned fuels, that the crime rate was going up. And they actually did blood samples of people that were convicted of, why did you do that that was just not normal human behavior. And it turns out they had high lead levels in their blood.
I found the same text, Monroe. I found in the same text that I put on the chat box.
Okay.
But the first law banning lead was in 1690.
Yeah,
in Germany.
Even though they banned it that far back, it didn't stop modern industrialists from going, how do we fix the problems in gasoline? Well, lead seems to work really well. Let's put lead in the gasoline. And so that's what they did, despite maybe they just didn't know prior history, but you'd think if they were chemists, somebody would have told them about it.
They knew. The guy who invented what's the name of the thing? Ethel. The guy who invented Ethel, he knew it, and he made a comment that it wouldn't be a crime or something the same effect to leave a gift from God not being exploited. It is free. So he commented that it was so cheap that he could not do it.
It's right there at the bottom of the current slide.
Oh.
So anyway, the sulfur in the atmosphere was increasing the rise of breathing ailments in bigger cities where there was a lot of diesel vehicles and a lot of manufacturing. The ozone hole was growing at Antarctica large enough that it started to reach all the way down to the southern end of South America. And they noticed that skin cancer rates were going up were going up in those general populations of those areas because of more UV. And we started noticing that these population blood samples that we take nowadays on a regular basis, we do spectroscopic analysis of blood samples, and we find these chemicals from manufacturing simply because we're touching products that have these in them, going right through our skin. So anyway, when they found out that lead was bad for you in gasoline, the president of Standard Oil, in response to requests to remove lead from gasoline, his name was Frank Howard, he said, "We do not feel justified in giving up what has come to the industry like a gift from heaven on the possibility that a hazard may be involved in it." In other words, it's a gift from on high and we're making good money. Why would we ever look that gift horse in the mouth? Because you're harming people? So that's the kind of the second stage of first you see that there's a problem, then you recognize the impact, but you don't take action on it. And then the next step is you realize, oh, yeah, this is going to be hurting everyone, including the people that are the people that control government decision making through their financial influence. So once they realize that everyone drinks the water and most people swim in the water, even rich or poor people can get sick if the Mediterranean Sea is full of pathogens because we're dumping sewage into it. Everyone wants to go outside and breathe the air, and if drink the water, and if that stuff has radioisotopes in it, they can increase your cancer risk, and it increases everyone's cancer risk. That's bad. And children breathe the air, and you can paint your house lovely colors, but if the paint has lead in it, it's going to affect the mental faculties of the next generation of children, regardless of where you live and how wealthy you are. And everyone wants to go outside and breathe the air. And the other one that really I found interesting was people of means had investments in historical structures, be they office buildings or noteworthy museums or edifices. They had money invested in those assets and that property, and they didn't want the acid rain essentially ruining their assets. And everybody likes to go outside and get some sunlight, some vitamin D, as they say, without having to wear sunscreen or protective clothing all the time to avoid skin cancer in the short term. So we got to fix that ozone hole problem. And everyone buys consumer products. You don't have to worry about where did you get it from, as it might be toxic to you. So, rich or poor, we all buy products. So we don't want those nasty things in our products. So when it turns out that everyone shares the resources or the products, and there's no way of, bifurcating it and saying, well, it won't be a problem for the wealthy because they don't do these things, and we don't care about what happens to everybody else. You can't escape that. And when assets that are owned by the wealthy are being decimated by negative effects like acid rain, destroying your buildings, it's time to take immediate action. Regardless of the negative effects on industry, job losses, and consumer prices. When the people that are helping the people that make the decisions to make the decisions by their financial influence, then they're going to go speak to their friends in government and say, you're going to have to either mandate corrective actions, establish moratoriums, or do something as soon as possible because you're affecting me and I'm where you get the money to run for office. So, yeah. Oh, and make sure all those other people are complying to the mandates and the moratoriums through fines and international. Let's make it treaties. So you start to find that all of these things that we knew for so long, that in fact we knew at the time they were being created that they were hazardous, The moment it becomes everyone's shared dilemma, it's time to take action immediately. And by the way, use tax dollars, don't use our money. So here's the immediate actions they took. You probably have heard of this. The Federal Water Pollution Control Act of 1972, also known as the Clean Water Act. And they've been lumping more things into that as we find new stuff that we don't want in our drinking water. A worldwide moratorium on nuclear weapons being detonated in the atmosphere and in space. Test ban treaty. Probably remember that phrase. The one that might not be something people were aware of, except when they go to a gas station and they see that giant white sticker in black print that says, for use as a motor fuel only, does not contain lead. You know, those stickers used to be the other way around. They used to be, for use as a motor fuel only, contains lead. And essentially the gasoline industry said, we need to stop this. And they found ways to make the engine's timing different such that they could do it without putting lead as an additive in gasoline to change its octane. And literally, that's all they were doing. Normal gasoline, when you compress it in a cylinder, if it doesn't have tetraethyl lead or the timing isn't right, then it'll explode early. And that's where you get your engine knock. Well, that engine knock is an inefficient consumption of gasoline. And also the knocking, depending upon where your piston is in its up-down travel, can actually hurt the engine, reduce its lifespan. So adding the tetraethyl lead was great because better gas mileage and your engines last longer. But you're killing people. So not good. And the YouTube video that Helen was referring to is on a YouTube channel called Veritasium. I highly recommend it. And the title of the video is The Man Who Accidentally Killed the Most People in History. And it was just posted this week. It was amazing to see that here I am trying to do this presentation, and I'm just strolling around on YouTube, and I find this video, and I go, that's poignant content. Thank you for that. Guy's name that does it is Derek. And this is something you might have heard of. It's a thing called scrubbing. And when you have a coal-fired plant, if it's manufacturing or if it's electrical generation, you need to scrub the sulfur out of the stack fumes because the sulfur was increasing the acid rain. We need to get that down to minimum levels. So federal mandates came in and said, thou shalt scrub thy coal burning plant. And corporations were just like, you got to do it. Doesn't care how much it costs, you got to do it. And then they also added, since diesel trucks were burning it, and they were burning diesel fuel that had a lot of sulfur in it, out came the new levels for minimum, it should be maximum, but minimum levels in truck fuels. So if you go to a gas station and you look at the pump, in some stations, the gasoline shares the bank of nozzles with the diesel fuel, and you can look over at the diesel fuel, and there'll be a little sticker that will proclaim the minimal amount of sulfur in the diesel fuel. But unless you're into, Class 8 level trucking, you probably weren't aware of this one. When you go to a place like a turnpike rest area and you want to fuel up your diesel truck with diesel fuel, there's this other stuff right next to the diesel fuel. Now, when there's a shared gasoline diesel pump, you don't see this. But if you look over where the dedicated diesel pumps are for the big trucks, they also have this other stuff called DEF. It's a required scrubbing fluid that gets sprayed into, the two stacks on the back of the semi, which is where the exhaust comes out. They actually spray that into the exhaust stream to knock down the sulfur levels in the exhaust. It also tends to knock down the lead levels in the exhaust, because when you burn the diesel through compression, you can pick up lead. So there's limits on coal-fired plants and scrubbing. Now that's mostly in countries other than China. I don't think China has the same scrubbing mandates. There's required minimum levels of sulfur in truck fuels. And then there's required semi-truck exhaust scrubbing fluid to be sprayed into your stacks. And then as far as the CFCs, the Freon goes, the Montreal Protocol, that's just where the event was held, that everybody decided internationally, yeah, we got to get rid of those R12 kind of things because it's hurting the ozone. Montreal Protocol came in and said, let's switch from CFCs to HCFCs, just a slight subtle change in the chemistry. The H stands for hydrogen. So they just added hydrogen to it, that when the UV breaks apart the molecule, it doesn't allow the chlorine to bond, because the hydrogen wants to bond more readily with the chlorine and produce hydrochlorides. So the new things are R410A and R134A. And if you want to spray things from a paint can or a hairspray can or anything else, you typically use pressurized CO2, which, hey, isn't that a greenhouse gas? So we switched from CFCs destroying the ozone to CO2 causing other problems. They've recently found that maybe nitrogen would be better, because the nitrogen is less chemically reactive, which is why they were using the CO2, because CO2 was already bound together. So we keep improving things. We go from bad in the left hand to still bad, but not as bad in the right hand, and just keep shuffling. And then we have something, you might see this on products, capital R, lowercase o, capital H, capital S. It's typically referred to as ROSE, or reduction of hazardous substances in products. And they're adding new substances to this list. So there are the original ROSE, and then there's an updated ROSE. So we found out all the good stuff, right? Right? We don't have any more bad stuff. It's all good, right? No, because now that we've kind of activated the mindset of looking around and measuring things, we're finding other things, like the pharmaceutical industry loves selling you pharmaceuticals, but some of those pharmaceuticals don't stay in your body. They go out through your affluents, through your urine and feces, and that goes into the septic sewage systems. And even though the sewage processing center has removed all of the normal stuff, a lot of the more complex pharmaceuticals do not get broken down or taken out, and they wind up in sewage outfall. And they're causing mutant fish. Basically, if you go to the sewage outfall of the city of Fort Lauderdale, you'll find modified fish because of all the pharmaceuticals in the sewage, even after it's been processed. Now, think about it for a moment. We send that out into the ocean because we don't want to be drinking that purified water. There are what they call gray water, where they do the normal sewage treatment, but rather than putting it back into the water supply, they use it for, public irrigation, for sprinkler systems, that kind of stuff. So you'll often see signs where they're using that to basically telling you, it's okay for the plants, but you don't want to be drinking the water coming out of the sprinkler. However, on the ISS, that's actually what they do. They take the water from the outfall, they process it through filters, and then they put it back into your water supply. So as long as you process it correctly.
Today's coffee is tomorrow's coffee.
Yes, today's coffee is tomorrow's coffee. Also, we found that it's very expensive when a hurricane with stronger winds rolls through Florida. So the state of Florida came and said, hey, FP&L, why don't you replace all of those old wooden poles with concrete poles? They're going to be more durable. And while you're at it, make the average pole bigger so they can at least take a Category 3 storm. Now, the cabling and the insulators may not be able to take a Category 3, but it's so much cheaper and your power is back on the air sooner if you don't lose the poles. So you might have noticed that in your neighborhood or along the streets you drive, all of a sudden the power poles have gotten taller, larger in diameter, and the wood ones have been replaced by cement ones. Just a little something that goes without saying. And the general sea level rise on assets, changing property values. So in Miami and on Fort Lauderdale Beach, they're spending tax dollars to build additional seawalls and raise the height of existing seawalls so that all of the high value properties will not get inundated by twice annual king tide sea level. And in Miami and on Fort Lauderdale Beach, they're actually raising the road levels and the site levels of some properties. One of the ones I went to recently was Everglades Holiday Park. Broward County spent a couple of $1 million renovating the site, and part of the renovation process, aside from making lovely bathrooms that are ADA compliant, that's good, was they said they only raised it a couple of feet. I know for a fact from looking at the site and having been there before the remodeling effort, there are some parts of that site that are about 6 feet higher than they used to be. So they're very quietly raising the level of property so that it doesn't get flooded. And then there's the negative effect of sea level rise on saltwater intrusion into freshwater sources. The state of Florida and multiple South Florida counties are spending money to raise Everglades water levels, increase the number of large pumping stations. They're going to build a large new pumping station at Everglades Holiday Park, and to create enormous water treatment reservoirs where the water running off from agriculture can sit in these ponds, and all the phosphate will sink to the bottom, and then they can take the water off the top and put that back in the Everglades. So it's water reclamation. So what are the warning signs that our planet is no longer as human habitable as it once was? And this is, even when we look at the very long-term planetary history, we see that these numbers are higher than they've ever been before. They're as high as they have been in the past, but they've actually exceeded that. So global average temperature, annual maximum temperature at the poles, you're looking at the North Pole in the summertime having an average temperature in the 60 degrees Fahrenheit range. At 60 degrees, there is no ice. There's no sea ice. It won't last. And also the average sea level increase, whether it's from heat expansion of the oceans or melting glaciers, it is rising. And then during the twice annual king tides, street and property flooding. Even in the absence of any rainfall. It's weird to see, why is the street flooded? It hasn't been raining for weeks. Well, we had a king tide and the water actually backed up through the stormwater treatment system and wound up in your street because we have a grading in your street. They're finding that certain types of pollution are once again raising their ugly head in major international urban areas. Even in places where we did things like put catalytic converters in cars to make the air more breathable in the Los Angeles metro area, the pollution levels are going back up because there are other things that are, polluting at with the same kinds of chemicals and new chemicals. And we're looking at all kinds of particulates, little chunks of plastic, and chemicals in fresh water sources. You can take ocean samples and filter them through micron level filters, and you'll find all kinds of little plastic particles in there that your eyes are not going to see unless you filter a whole bunch of it and you see it as a collection in the filter. But it's there and you're consuming it. And then the two things like saltwater intrusion, but there's another thing called desertification. This is where you have a place that typically got a seasonal rain or snow that would compensate for water losses, a rise of water into the atmosphere during the hotter months of the year. And there's less water coming down from the sky than there is water being taken up by the heat. So you're having places where you used to have a lot of greenery, now you're having a lot of brown, and that's how you get things like fires that weren't annual, that are now seasonal, let alone annual. You can look to Spain. Spain, because of its location and the things they've done over the years, is having a large problem with desertification right now. Most of the country, not just in one area, but most of the country. So they're trying to come up with new programs that will regreen things for them.
What did they do that caused that?
Agriculture mostly. They were doing a lot of crops that weren't growing elsewhere because Spain had just the right climate. So there were a lot of vegetable products, and there were a lot of flowers. There's a huge market for floral stuff, and Spain was a big provider of that in Europe. So they were
cattle too, because they are planning for food for the cattle.
Yeah,
and then the cattle also, if they had like green pastures, they just eat and messed up with the whole system. Kind of what happened in Yellowstone, that they have to return the predators to Yellowstone to actually regulate the nature.
Yeah, literally they were consuming the organic materials out of the soil, and therefore when it dried out, it just became desert. So environmental impacts, if you don't take action initially when they start happening, the adverse impact will have a momentum to it. Like it was with lead in gasoline. They tried to go cold turkey and stop producing automobile gasoline fuels with lead additives in them. But because small prop airplanes were not going to replace the airplane engines overnight or adjust them, it's still allowed in small aircraft, piston-driven aircraft engines. So they didn't get rid of it completely. And just that small amount was such that it creates an environmental momentum. So you can cold turkey stop some effect you're having on the environment, but there's still enough of it left in the environment, or you didn't stop all manufacturing operations involving it. And so you have this continued rolling wave forward that you have to work through that. And they were saying something like from the day that they stopped putting lead in gasoline, it would be another 50 years before they would see a significant drop in general population lead levels, to the point where it would be, I think they went from 100 plus parts per million, and I think the current legal limit is around 3.5 parts per million, but they want to get that down even further. So environmental impacts have momentum. And when you try and do something cold turkey, people will complain about the personal effects on what they're doing. I can't get the products I used to because, I used to get this lovely sunscreen, but then they stopped putting parabens in it, which was a toxic chemical. And I can't get this brand of sunscreen I want anymore. Can't get the products you want. Or I really liked my car with lots of shiny chrome on it, but the chromium in the chrome is toxic, and yeah, you don't put that on vehicles anymore. There's a lot of same color as body trim. Or the products you knew and loved can no longer use the cheap toxic chemicals, so they had to raise the prices on them, or in order to get the bad stuff out of the affluent of the manufacturing process, we have to put in scrubbers or whatever, so it increases the product's prices. And whether you've known it or not, insurance rates are going up. And you may not be able to get insurance for your property, or you may be able to get everything except flooding insurance or stormwater and storm force wind insurance, because the insurance companies are no fools. They don't want to pay out all that money, especially when they know it's more likely to happen. And their statisticians are telling them that. You don't want to insure this. You don't want to offer that product. You don't want to offer it in that state. And if every season your property goes underwater for 3 or 4 days, you don't want that, because it's going to reduce your property values. And if somebody doesn't stop that immediately, and you want to go sell your property, you're not going to get as much for it as you want. So it's going to affect your property value. And people will need to move from uninhabitable zones or less inhabitable zones to more inhabitable ones. And that's just, that's happening today as people in Africa move from places where deserts are now, where there used to be lush green area, because they literally took all the organic material out of the soil through cattle farming and agriculture. And so they just moved elsewhere. But the one I like, this I've got a separate slide on this, something you might not have heard of yet, called climate gentrification. Yes, it's a thing, and it's right here, right now, in South Florida. So what is climate gentrification?
Like talking about climate gentrification, they are overpricing Little Havana and Little Haiti, because those are the highest area in Miami. So they are totally raising the taxes and raising the rents. So all the people are having to move.
Yeah, this is actually a thing that's happening right here in South Florida right now. Climate gentrification. If there is property worth a lot of money that is in a low-lying area like beachfront or waterfront, even if you're well inland but you're near flood management canals, if your property is getting flooded out for a couple of days at a time, at least twice a year during the king tides, your property values are going to go down. Well, that's not good. If you have $1 million house, for it to suddenly be worth only $750,000, that's a lot of money left on the table. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to use your financial influence to go find higher ground. Well, what if there are people living there? Well, if they're living there and they also have multi-million-dollar homes, you're not going to go move there, because that's going to be expensive and your property's not worth as much. So you've got to find other property. So if you can find property that is higher ground, predominantly residential or small business, and is rental as opposed to owned, then you can maybe work a deal with the landlords to say, if you will raise your rents and run out your current tenants, then I will buy your land, level the businesses and homes that were there, and I will put my new multi-million-dollar dwellings there. Or I will start a new subdivision with very high property values to keep out the riffraff. And that's actually happening. As Helen was saying, Little Haiti and certain part of the Cuban district in Miami is in this plight right now, where rents are going up, taxes are going up, and it's driving people out. And when you get driven out, As long as you clear up a block, then the block gets sold, and then it becomes, upscale property. It gets gentrified. Now, this is actually a recognized thing by the Natural Resources Defense Council. So there's an article on it. And I found this one to be interesting. There is a website called climatecentral.org where you can switch between maps. You can zoom down to a particular neighborhood, and then you can look at the income levels, ethnicity, and sea level rise. And you can find where all of the expensive properties that are currently seeing sea level rise issues, you can find the low-lying properties that are losing value, and you can find the 6 foot higher ground properties that are cheap, that generally have rental, residential, or small businesses in them, and you can map it. So you can actually flip between, here's where my property is that I don't want to be, here's where the property is that's cheap to get, and now I can find these are rental folks and they don't have money, and I can just have some, I'll pay the landlord to shove them out by running the rent up, and then I'll buy that cheap property. And this one was also another one is WGCU, which is a University of Western Governors, in their real estate discussions, when they're basically teaching people how the real estate business works, they're actually talking about when you go to buy property, people are not looking for things like how many bedrooms and baths, and does it have a swimming pool, and what's the nearest school. And they're now also looking at, and how high above king tide is it? They're buying property based upon, if I'm a young couple and I haven't got kids yet, and I want to buy this property and own it for a while, 30 years from now, will it be underwater? Will it retain its value? Well, I'm going to buy higher ground. And they're doing that. And the real estate brokers are actually saying, oh, well, would you like a property that's higher ground? Yeah, it's a thing. So regarding what's going on these days, what's the turning point? Aside from, people not generally recognizing these things, especially if they're outliers and affecting only certain people, such as climate gentrification, there will come a point in time when it becomes generally recognized that the planet is no longer as habitable as it once was. It doesn't mean it's inhabitable. It just means there are certain areas where, if you're going to go outside, you need to wear a lot of clothing and sunscreen because there's a lot of UV there, or the temperature is very high and it's just uncomfortable to be out there, or airplanes can't land and take off when the temperature in Phoenix, Arizona near the airport is more than 112 degrees because the air density gets too low to support the airplane taking off and landing. So these are all indications that we're getting close to the turning point for some things. But prior to us getting to that point, those with the most jeopardy financially will influence those in elected positions to take immediate actions, regardless of the cost to the general population, because they're going to have your tax dollars pay for it. The people that have the money are not going to pay for it themselves. So insurance companies, pay attention to what they're doing. They're leaving certain markets. They're no longer providing certain insurance services. They're no longer providing associated flood insurance claims. Flood insurance is a federal program, but the private insurance companies subsidize it and execute it. Well, you're now having to see things like the state of Florida having its own insurance company because it's too expensive and companies don't want to insure if they're going to have to pay out. In fact, they like insurance to be a sure thing. And some small insurance companies that tried to supplant the exodus of large companies, actually, when they had to pay out, collectively, if all of a sudden they had to pay out hundreds of millions to $1 billion, much cheaper for them. Just go declare bankruptcy, go broke, bye-bye, than pay claims. But in the meantime, they took your money they're just not going to be able to pay the claims because all the money went away, typically for operating the company or paying the executives. Or for those people with expensive property assets that are under immediate threat. So in other words, same as the sudden urgencies and massive efforts of prior environmental issues, when the people with the money are under personal threat from something that's inescapable because it's a shared hazard, then action must be taken immediately, just not at their personal cost. Even though the threat is shared, why should they personally pay for it? So raise those seawalls and raise the highways and area roads. Just do it using tax money instead of me having to pay for the higher seawall. Now this is weird because it's not only seawalls in front of people's properties, it's seawalls along the back of their properties, which is typically shoreline. So if all of a sudden you need a seawall, or you need a seawall that's there repaired or raised, that was put in, you know, when the property was set up, and why isn't, you know, somebody else paying for it than everybody in the community? And that's just the way things are executed these days. But let's hope that we don't get to this turning point too late to counter that negative momentum I was speaking of. So here's unrealistic expectations. If the expectation is once we get to that undeniable tipping point, we'll just go tap on the government and say, hey, government, demand that science and technology suddenly be invented to go solve this problem. The Manhattan Project kind of thing. The Manhattan Project worked because there was physics that you could go develop things to. Well, to correct the environment right now on a global scale, we don't have the physics, let alone the science and the technology. So you can't just suddenly go, oh my God, I never knew it was this bad. Please fix it now. Government, take action, using tax dollars. So if you expect the government and industry to immediately come to our rescue, you know, atmosphere and water resources are planet-wide, and the solutions need to be planet-wide as well. You can't do it just for your community and then have the neighboring community take your water, like they do in the southwest of the U.S., or there's a polluting city near you that you're getting the wind change. And improving one area doesn't solve the worldwide issue. So even if the U.S. did it, you've got to have other countries sign up to do it as well. Now, solving these issues worldwide, given the momentum, it's going to require trillions of global expenditures. And it's going, even if we did something, it's going to require many years to develop the technology, many years to develop the actual solutions, the infrastructure and the systems to mitigate things. And it's going to mandate lifestyle changes in individuals. And even if we did everything we could, we're going to have to counter it with an effect that's more sizable. So if we examine how much carbon we're putting into the atmosphere today and say, that's all we've got to take out. Now, you probably have to consider creating the solution that will take out, you know, twice or better that, because it's going to take you a while to develop it and deploy it. And by then, you're already putting out a bigger number. So you need to get ahead of the curve, so to speak. I think of it like highways. When you see that a highway, an expressway like 595 gets too crowded, you don't want to build one more lane each direction. You want to build 3 more lanes each direction, because in the time it takes you to build the additional lanes, you're going to add more cars to it. So these things have momentum. So as long as humans didn't individually or even collectively damage the planet to too great a level, if we stop what we were doing, slowly over time, the planet would recover all by itself. And that's the misinterpretation that what's happening now is just a cycle, and if we just stop what we're doing, the planet will recover itself automatically. Well, with the dawn of the industrial age and continuing to this day, the collective damage we're doing has a growing momentum. So despite all of the things we're trying to do to improve stuff, we're not getting ahead of the curve. This is the weird thing, and I've seen this as a program on Science Channel. Even if humans suddenly no longer existed, it would take a very long time for the Earth to recover because that momentum is built up in the environment that's already here. So even if we stopped what we were doing that raises the temperature would continue to increase, sea level would continue to increase. All we can do is slow down that increase. Freshwater sources will continue to become salty. Desertification will continue to increase. So we've literally got to do more than just defend the planet or to correct our actions. We've got to start cleaning it up. And we may have to do this for multiple decades of massive actions to counter the negative momentum to suddenly make the planet, instead of less and less habitable, return it to more habitable. People don't think about what goes away when something affects nearby where they are, but not them directly. So let's consider one aspect, which is coastal sea level rise at your location. Let's ignore saltwater intrusion. We'll ignore sea level rise in oceans and whether or not they're low tide pumping in stations that don't work or whatever. Let's just talk about your property is well above sea level. It's 12 feet above sea level, and there's only a 6-foot rise, so it won't affect your property directly. But if you live in a higher area, like some of that property in Miami-Dade County, where they're 6 feet higher than the expected 6-foot sea level rise, then fine, just go live on the higher ground. But what about the stuff that gets to your higher ground that is on lower ground, like city water? If you put the plumbing under seawater, is it going to be salty water that you're drinking? What about the sewer system and storm drains? Will they back up because the area around your property is going to be flooded, but your property is going to be dry? What about the power that gets to your house? If your power cables are underground or your telephone's underground, will that get flooded out by salt water and destroy the electronics? What about cell phone towers? The tower itself is probably going to be okay, but what about the trunk connections to it and the electronics that are sitting on the ground? What about gasoline filling stations and food stores and people trying to get delivery of goods and services to your house? Postal service, Uber and Lyft and taxis, the access roads. You may have a 4-wheel drive vehicle, but if the area beyond your house where you want to get to is 6 feet under, your 4-wheel drive vehicle won't be enough. And even if there is a little bit of water, but there's still traffic, what about the traffic signals and streetlights getting inundated by salt water? So you may live on an elevated, dark, inaccessible island with no services that will affect your property values. You may have to buy an electrically powered pontoon boat to get beyond your island. You may have to buy solar power panels to get yourself some electricity. You may be buying batteries to store the solar power, an inverter. And for your internet, you may be signing up to SpaceX Starlink to get your internet. So if you wanted to take action, what's your like bullet points? I want to join the Army. I want to become an environmentalist. What do I do? First thing you do is you educate yourself with the blinders off. You don't start saying, well, until there's consensus opinion. You educate yourself. You learn the information that's out there now. And take note of the big picture. It's more than just, well, my neighborhood looks fine. What about the planet? Realize how these things can impact things worldwide. And do think about your own vested interest by, things that are happening in your area. I know some people on Miami Beach were very unimpressed with all the road work that took place in front of their house to raise the seawalls and raise the road levels because it was making it difficult to get into their driveway. And that's all they were thinking about. So you can have things that will affect you personally and your lifestyle, but it's nothing that, the actual source of the problem affected you directly. It's the downstream parts of the changes that have to be made. And not everyone's going to become an environmentalist. Not everyone is going to be into this, but they're going to live on the same planet you do. So you have to do the part that they're not going to do. So recognize that there will be heartfelt disbelievers, and they also require a habitable planet. And recognize that the counter-protesters might be thinking of only their short-term personal impacts, such as their job if you close the coal mines, or their wallets if prices increase. Generally thinking about the immediate concern, which is meaningful, but they may not be thinking about what about their great-grandchildren? Will they have will they inherit a Earth that is less habitable? And once you do notice personal impacts that you can see substance, you can actually observe it. Let people know that you're now aware that there's actually impact. And realize that those with financial and political vested interest have the power. So use the power of your wallet to buy the products that, from companies that are thinking about such things, and use your vote, regardless of the party, to empower the people that realize what's going on and want to make change, so that the end result is that their efforts are more effective for you. And if they're more effective for you, regardless of your baseline interest, then they're effective for everyone they have influence on. Okay, now we get to the ones that you're not paying attention to that are out there, and you can look at them and you can go, gee, I didn't know that the guys with the billions are already doing these things. Maybe they know something we don't know. Maybe they're spending money to make sure the message doesn't get out so far because they're not quite ready yet. So I've spoken of this before, that Florida Power and Light, or its parent company NextEra, is spending billions in Florida to migrate from natural gas fueled power plants to solar panels and batteries. And they found that they're generating more power than they can use, and they're storing more power than they can use. So they plan on using the excess power to split water through electrolysis to produce and then cryogenically store hydrogen to burn in modified natural gas power plants. And the first one they're doing this in is the Jupiter power plant towards the northeast coast of Florida. And the solar panels are actually out in the Everglades, and the batteries on the west coast of Florida. So they're actually shipping the excess power for the electrolysis across the Florida power grid from the west coast of Florida to the east coast of Florida. And next to the Jupiter plant is where they'll split the water and produce and store the hydrogen. And then they'll use a local gas distribution line to transport the hydrogen over to the power plant. Something else that Florida Power and Light is doing, they're hitting this from both ends. Think of the power generation and distribution as they'd like to be able to create the power and not have to have a variable payment for the fuel to generate the power. So they don't want to be beholden to whoever the natural gas supplier is to keep the power revenue stream and the margins stable. But they're also doing this on the other end, that they've hooked up with a company called ChargePoint. They have electric vehicle charging stations, and they're rebranding them as FPL Evolution branded charging stations. So if you own a non-Tesla EV, you might have seen these FPL branded chargers at Florida Turnpike rest areas. if you don't own an EV of any kind, you may not have even noticed them because they're not immediately adjacent to the gas and diesel pumps. They're over there. They're still in the rest area. They're just over there behind the shrubbery, and they don't stand up very tall, and there's no big signage. But if you own a Tesla EV, these are usually sort of right across the aisle from the Tesla chargers. Shell Oil. Yeah, they have a new division called Shell Energy. Actually, they have a website, shellenergy.com. They want to be in the fleet power supply business. So they're offering something called physical power purchase agreements. If you have, let's say, City of Fort Lauderdale Police Department suddenly gets it into their mind to switch out all their gasoline vehicles and have electric vehicles. Well, you've got a storage lot full of law enforcement vehicles. They're going to need to be charged up every night. Well, you don't want to have to put in the infrastructure for all those chargers. So what do? You give Shell Energy a phone call and say, we'd like to pay for Shell Energy to come over and put in, 24 charging points for our law enforcement vehicles, and we'll charge them up overnight. And Shell will say, if you sign this purchase agreement to stay under contract for this many years, probably 10, 20 years, and you sign up to consume at least this much electricity through the equipment we put in, we'll put in the equipment for free. So it's a revenue sharing agreement. So far, I see them doing this for fleet sites, for corporate fleet sites where there's a lot of vehicles. AT&T has a lot of vehicles they use for, gasoline trucks, gasoline cars to go out to sites and do things. Well, if they switch those over to electric, they don't want to have to pay for that infrastructure for the charging. Who are they going to call? They're going to call Shell Energy. Come in, put it in our switching centers. But so far, it looks like Shell's only doing this for cars and light trucks. They're not doing this for fleet class 8 semi vehicles like Tesla semi trucks. But I think they'll get there. Shell is adding charging points to their existing Shell-owned and operated fuel stations. This is a migration to keep the Shell name out there and to keep these Shell-owned mini-marts in revenue as vehicles are transitioning from internal combustion engines or ICE to EVs or electric vehicles. So they're adding, okay, we've got 8 gasoline pumps. We'll add 4 charging pumps, 4 charging connections. And they're offering this to resellers. So you can go out there and buy a Shell-based solution, but it won't say Shell on the outside. It'll say Shell on a little plate down the bottom. So you can create a new company that resells the Shell power purchase agreements to individual consumers. And one of the companies that's doing this is a company you may be hearing from a lot in the next year or two. It's a company in China called BYD. Bring your dreams. They like these cute names. But Shell is working with BYD in China to create Shell Recharge branded filling stations for electric vehicles. No gas, possibly no mini mart, just places where you can get electricity for your car. And they're doing this in China big time, tens of thousands of them in certain cities. And in Europe, they're talking throughout all of Europe, maybe in the 20,000 charge points level. So this is Shell going, gasoline is on the decline, so we need to be there when it rises up, and Shell Energy to the rescue. Now, they're not going cold turkey. They're not saying, okay, let's just quit the gasoline business. They're saying we better be in this other market as new things come in and things change, we want to be on the rising edge. Then there is, we thought we had it covered, and we didn't. There's a company called LG, which is another fun name, Life's Good. They branched out and they created a company out of LG Electronics in South Korea called LG Solar. And for a while, they were a really good company to go get your solar panels from. But you generally get them through a reseller. So you wouldn't buy products from LG Solar. You would buy products from some local installer who would go buy them from LG Solar. And then they'd come and install them. So they would take the solar panels, buy them from LG wholesale, put a retail markup on it, and that's how LG would get lots of solar panel sales and how the local installers would make money. So commercial buildings and residences would buy their solar solutions from LG authorized independent panel resellers and installers. And LG had some really good panels. They were strong and good frames. They came with good, electrical distribution. It was good stuff. So between the LG name recognition and the fact that they were, what you thought of at the time as great panels, LG commanded a premium price for their panels. But the premium was literally that. It was thick margin, which created a place where newer technologies and newer companies creating cheaper panels, they could deal with 25% margin instead of 50%, and they could grow themselves. Mostly this is little-known suppliers in China. LG could no longer command their high-margin price to make the money they needed to stay in the wholesale PV panel business. So as of June 30th of this year, LG is cold turkey, just bye-bye, leaving the solar panel business. And the companies that are going to come in to fill that for the solution installers will likely be companies that you've never heard of before from China, and strange as it sounds, Vietnam. So soon it'll just be, who are you going to complain against? Well, China. No, it's not China. Must be in general things that are Asian, because Vietnam is finding high tech as a very large growth sector for them. Soon you're going to see electric automobiles imported from Vietnam. They're already having that in Australia. Okay, now this is a interesting transformation that until I saw it this week just by stumbling on it, I did not know this. When you put solar panels on your house, they're in these heavy metal frames to make them durable, and they have to be mounted on brackets. And that's, when you drive by on the street, you can go, he's got solar, he's got solar, he's got solar, because they stand out as very obvious. And when they put these frames onto the roof of your house, they have to drive large lag bolts, hundreds of them, into your roof. That creates the susceptibility for two things: water damage by water leaking around a lag bolt that wasn't installed correctly, or these flat panels that are raised up by 3 or 4 inches having a heavy wind lifting capability and damaging your roof by pulling it off. And when you had leaks or your roof got damaged because of improper installation of the panels, you have the roofing services provider going, it's their fault, they should pay for it, you shouldn't. And then you have the solar installation installer going, it's not us, your roof failed. So you've got them pointing fingers at each other. And therefore you don't get the problem solved, and you wind up with a blue roof and no solar. There is a company that is in the roofing materials business. They make, basically, they are the leading provider of alternative material shingles for shingle-based roofs. They're a company called GAF. Or, if you're Hank Fonda, how do you pronounce it? GAF. I'm old, what can I say? So they've created a new division called Gaf Energy. They offer a product called Timberline brand roof shingles. These are roof shingle sized solar panels. So the next time you get your roof reshingled, you can get it reshingled with good portions of the roof having GAF timberline photovoltaic panels, and they look like just dark colored roofing shingles. And they have a little strip up the side where the power grid runs. Now, because they lie flat and they're thin, they're not so obvious or unsightly as a big glass panel with a aluminum frame around it. So you don't get the same unsightly appearance. And because they don't have to drive a bunch of lag bolts into your wood roof, you don't get the roof leak potential because the shingles are put up there the same way they are any other shingles. Air compression nail guns, which are generally not so long as they create a problem for roof leaks. And because they overlap them, they really don't create a problem for roof leaks because they tuck under one another. So it solves the problem because now you can have your solar panels and you can have your roofing. And if something goes wrong and it leaks, you only got one guy to point to, whoever installed your GAF timberline and regular roof shingles. So if this takes off, I can understand why LG Solar left the panel business. Because if this thing takes off, it's like if you're making those big glass-covered aluminum framed panels that mount on brackets using lag bolts in your roof, you're going to be yesterday's news. And Tesla, who has their solar tiles, they're still a solar roofing installer. They're not a roofing installer. GAF installers will do both of them for you at the same time and cover both of them. And they're even thinner than the Tesla solar tiles. So look for GAF Timberline brand roof shingles. Not to be undone. The former British Petroleum rebadged themselves, of course, as BP. Nobody could know you were British Petroleum if you call yourself BP. But they're also the parent company of Amoco, Arco, Castrol, not castor oil, but Castrol, and the filling station company brand known as Aral in Germany. But they also own and operate the AM, PM mini markets in a number of gas stations, so BP does all of that. But by 2050, BP wants to be net zero, as in BP getting out of the oil, natural gas, and lubricants market and going into solar, wind, and biofuels? No, say it isn't so. Yeah, it's so. You can actually see it on their website. But the interesting thing is, much like FP&L, they also want to be a electrical charge provider. They've got a division called BP Charge Master with a product called Pulse, and they want to sell you the charging station for your home. But they want to do kind of like what Shell's doing. They'll come out and they'll install it, and based upon how much energy you get through it, they'll charge you a premium, and that's how you cover the cost of the equipment installation. Or you can buy it. And they have two different kinds. One is the one charge, which is not a DC high-speed fast charge. It's just a higher amperage AC charge. And then they have the DC fast charge called fast charge, amazingly. Well, they also want to sell to fleet solution providers. So they have a floor standing version of fast charge. And then if you're doing this for your fleet, you obviously want to monitor across all your vehicles, how are things going? So they have a reporting system that they'll charge you a fee for, obviously, called Charge Vision. But they also want to be in the public charging business. So you may see some BP filling stations or Amoco filling stations or Arco filling stations or Aral in Germany filling stations that suddenly pop up these electrical charging connections called UltraCharge. Found this one this week. Southern California Gas and Electric. Well, they had problems with electrical causing fire, so they kind of dropped the electric part and now it's just SoCal Gas. They not only provide electricity, they provide natural gas to businesses and homes. They're the natural gas distributor, the predominant one in California. But they would like to do what Florida Power and Light is doing in Florida. They would like to create solar power going to batteries, going to hydrogen production through electrolysis. But then here's the thing that they want to do that FPL can't do. Because SoCal Gas owns the natural gas distribution pipeline in California, they want to mix a certain percentage of their cheaply produced hydrogen to replace the natural gas in their pipeline. So much like you see alcohol in gasoline, and you see the little thing saying not more than 10% or 15% or whatever of alcohol in your gasoline, that lets them offset the cost of producing the product that you consume. Same thing here. By SoCal Gas producing the hydrogen that they put into their existing distribution network, they can now mix natural gas with hydrogen. So by replacing some of the natural gas, they're reducing the greenhouse gases they're burning, or end users are burning. They're making it cheaper for them to produce what people consume, and they're less reliant upon existing fuel sources if they have to either get them shipped in or pull them out of the ground through efforts. But those that are science-minded might ask questions like, doesn't hydrogen burn at a faster rate than natural gas? Yes, natural gas goes boom, whereas hydrogen goes kaboom. Hydrogen is going to explosively burn much faster. So you won't be allowed to put a high percentage of hydrogen mixed in with the natural gas. Also, hydrogen compresses at a much lower level than does natural gas. So the amount of hydrogen you can compress into an existing pipeline under its current pressure will be less. So it might only be, 8 to 12% hydrogen in the natural gas. Now they may convince certain businesses to modify their burners, much like FP&L is modifying their power plants, so they can burn hydrogen directly. But then you need separators to separate out the hydrogen from the hydrogen and natural gas mix. Hydrogen is reactive. It doesn't just explode, it doesn't just burn, it's also chemically reactive. And if there's any moisture in the pipeline, it will work to oxidize the metal in your pipelines. It produces hydrols. So any small crack, as a result, will leak through the cracks, whereas natural gas needs a larger crack because it's a bigger molecule. And when hydrogen gas leaks out, unlike natural gas, you won't be able to smell it. Hydrogen gas is odorless, colorless, tasteless, but if you give it a spark from static electricity, it's not kaboomless. So there's lots of safety issues to consider. Maybe SoCal Gas will start slow and just do what Florida Power and Light's doing, and then branch out to only providing the hydrogen to specific industrial sites that have converted their burners. Okay, so what's common amongst these transformations? It's just business. They can see the writing on the wall. They can see what's happening. They can see what's going to be happening to their current business models. How do they spend whatever money it takes to get ahead of the curve so there's still a dominant player once things transition? Well, next year at FPL, Shell, and BP, they realize that their current markets are declining, and they're going to spend the multiple billions of dollars to be meaningful in the coming decades. What LG Solar realized is even if you come in early and you think you've transitioned to the new energy market, if you don't keep up with it, if you don't stay ahead of the curve, you can be kicked to the curb by new companies coming in because your margins were thick enough that it allowed new companies with thinner margins to come in and displace you. What GAF realized was, sure, we can be in the roofing materials business, but that doesn't mean we can't come up with solutions that bridge our roofing business into the new energy markets. So roofing shingles that are photovoltaic panels. And what SoCal realized is if natural gas is going to be something that you want to get away from and you want to produce green hydrogen, what do you do with it? Well, you can do what FP&L is doing and burn it in your own power plants. But if you also own the natural gas grid and you're selling to commercial sites, industry, and consumers, maybe you can mix a little of that cheap to create, no external source jeopardy hydrogen in with your natural gas to make a little more of that green margin. I wanted people's understanding. I wanted them to want to be aware of this stuff. I didn't want your disdain by me saying things that turn you off to it. So not a lot of references to global warming and which corporations might be responsible for it. No accountability. It's just, these are things that are happening. No reference to doomsday glaciers that are going to break off or shrinking snow caps. No reference to the global decline in bee populations. And before I started the session tonight, I actually checked on that. It's not as big a thing as it used to be. They've recognized that some bee populations do go through seasonal transitions, but worldwide there is still a global decline in bee populations. I still think it might be a virus. Strange as it sounds, different species of bees are dirty. And the way they refer to dirty bees as a bee of a certain species will go take nectar from a flower, and they'll, in order to lighten their load, they'll poop on the flower. And another bee coming along and wanting to get nectar from the same flower will be exposed to the virus in the bee poop. Just strange.
I think the larger factor would be agrotoxics.
Yes. The insecticides are also considered that, but they said that the insecticides were not as sustained a problem because the bee populations, when they decline in winter months, they kind of recover from that. And then when they come back with such an abundance that that's less of an issue, that the insecticides are the issue. It's more viral. And once you get a population down, if the virus is still there, it tends to put downward pressure on the populations. And I didn't mention super bees or killer hornets, as they're migrating northerly because of heat. And I didn't mention invasive species like snakes or plants that are also moving northerly. I didn't show you any pictures at all, or any endangered animals swimming or on shrinking plots of sea ice. No scary pictures of polar bears or polar bears that undergoing a huge weight loss. I didn't pressure anyone to recycle, although it's not a bad idea. I didn't pressure anyone to adopt reusable containers. Well, it's not a bad idea. I didn't state that light pollution is increasing worldwide cancer rates because that's something different. I didn't demand anyone immediately ditch their internal combustion vehicle and go out and buy a battery EV right now. Why would I do that? Because the prices are too high. When China and Vietnam entered the US marketplace with their electric vehicles, look for the prices to come down noticeably. And then the companies that have expensive EVs that can afford to make them cheaper and they just have fat margin, they just make the prices lower and still compete. The ones that can't afford it because their margins are too thin, in Chapter 11, anyone? Can I get a government handout? I didn't state any particular position regarding nuclear power or power generation or hydrogen-fueled vehicles and how that gets distributed and how it gets burned or consumed. No demand for anyone to immediately switch to public transportation, although when I go to cities on business, I typically do use the public transportation because it's faster and it's cheaper if it's a good system. I didn't demand everyone to switch to electric scooters, bicycles, or walking, although when you can, that's not bad. Get some exercise too. I didn't discuss cow farts or consuming animals is bad for the planet because it is, and that's something you can look into if you're really interested. And I didn't demand for everyone to become a vegan, although I'm sliding rather quickly in that direction. I still have my lapses like certain holidays. And, you know, I feel better. It seems to be an improvement. So give it a try, but don't try it for a couple of days. Try it for, I'd say, 2 grocery store trips. So when you need to go buy groceries, try and make an effort to not buy as much or any meat or dairy products and consume that. And the next time you go to the store, see if it doesn't have an effect on your pattern of what you buy. And after you go through a couple of cycles of that, you realize, gee, I'm getting along just fine without those things. And in conclusion, welcome to the worldwide celebration known as Earth Day 2022. We have one place where humans can exist. That's planet Earth. Our actions are jeopardizing the continued human habitability of Earth. Those with money and influence will not be able to escape the negative effects on resources that are shared, regardless of their wealth and power. And so those with influence will demand governments take action immediately at taxpayers' expense, regardless of the impacts to jobs, just as they have done numerous times in the past. Or do you still think there's lead in gasoline? Large corporations not waiting for public consensus to decide their actions, like all those corporations that I mentioned, they're not waiting for, a government to come down with a consensus left and right facing to say, yep, we got to do something about it. No, they're off spending billions now doing it. And these are some very conservative companies. But they're doing it for the survival of their corporations. And I'm sure their executives, and to a certain degree, their shareholders, and to a lesser degree, their customers, which are the ones that buy their products and keep the money flowing. And realize that the issues and the accommodations will be less expensive if executed sooner rather than later. Don't assume governments and science and technology are a magic bullet to solve everything in the blink of an eye once you realize it. And do try to improve the habitability of Earth as soon as rapidly as possible, individually and collectively as a planet. And I provided a couple of links. Comments or questions?
I have a couple of comments on the paragraph where you talked about adding hydrogen to natural gas.
Yes.
First, there was a typo in there. It said that natural gas is reactive, but it should have said hydrogen. You said
yes,
hydrogen.
Hydrogen, you're right. That's an error. I didn't spot that. But
and
yes,
the second
hydrogen. It's the hydrogen that interacts with water that makes the corrosive material that can damage the pipes. And?
Yeah. In the same paragraph you mentioned, I think hydrogen doesn't smell, so you couldn't detect if there were a leak. But natural gas doesn't smell either. A smell is added to it.
That is correct.
So could they not do the same for hydrogen? Well,
if it's only hydrogen that it's in the pipeline, then you won't smell it. So they would have to add an additive. If it's a mix of hydrogen and natural gas, you're still going to put the additive in the pipeline so you'll smell the natural gas. So it's once they do the full conversion to hydrogen only, that's when they're going to need to put something in there so you'll detect it. And
the smell molecules would have to be the same size or smaller than hydrogen.
Yeah, they'd have to be compatible with hydrogen being in the pipeline under pressure.
You cannot mix hydrogen with hydrocarbons. It's explosive.
You can't have a molecule smaller than hydrogen. And it's methyl mercaptan, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hydrogen doesn't like to stand alone easily as just hydrogen. You'll get H2. In the case of helium, it is inert, and you'll just get He. So do two hydrogen atoms have a larger molecular size than a single helium atom?
Well,
No.
practically, though, we were talking
They
about...
occupy the same volume because,
Yes.
you know, but in the case of the size of the molecule, hydrogen is way much smaller.
Yes. So where we're already talking about natural gas pipelines leaking methane, that same level of crack would be enormous for hydrogen.
Yeah, I think it is local. It cannot be transported. It's not safe enough to be transported, you know, like in large quantities. I don't think they would do like a pipeline for hydrogen. It's not safe at all. The only thing they can do is do the reverse burning of the hydrogen, so transforming in water again, and moving the turbines and producing electricity, and that would be transported via lines. I don't think you can have pipelines with hydrogen. It's not safe at all.
That seems to be your opinion, but if you go back and look, you can follow the link that I provided. Yeah, they are doing this, and it's more than just them. It's more than just SoCal Gas that's doing this. There are natural gas distribution providers in Europe that are looking for ways to add hydrogen to their pipelines. And yeah, it is, you know, if you can blow up an apartment building because of a gas leak, imagine how much forceful that explosion would be if it's a hydrogen leak.
Yeah, it's not safe at all.
And imagine, oh, I'm going to fill my car up with hydrogen as its fuel.
Yeah, but those can be transported safely via tanks in pressure and saved in local to pressure. So you can transport some of it. It's not too bad because they have like special, but pipelines, I don't think that is safe.
Well, I know it's not safe. I know it's not safe. I know it's not safe, but also it's unsafe to put lead in gasoline. But we did.
For years.
Yeah.
My whole generation, I bet I have more lead in my blood than in my bones than you do. Because it was basic my generation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where the expression "get the lead out" come from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sinclair, we got the lead out.
Okay, yeah. And it was like a fight to actually do it because
you were making good money.
You know, back then they actually did it, but I don't know if we have some kind of problem.
Even when they removed the lead from gasoline, from motor fuels, it wasn't because of public outcry. It wasn't because people were dying in gasoline manufacturing plants. It was because the people with the money realized that can affect them too. They're not isolated from it. It's the general atmosphere. So yeah, we need to stop this. And they went over to their friends in government and they said, you need to come up with a moratorium to migrate away from this right now. And that's where you find that, you know, the Clean Air Act gets modified to reduce lead. You find catalytic converters in cars. All of this like happened so quickly, not because of a public outcry, not because people were dying or, you know, student education levels were going down or because crime rates were going up. It was because people of means were being affected adversely, and we can't have that happening. And to correct this, go spend the taxpayers' dollars. So this whole thing about climate change, once that starts affecting the right people, they're going to start taking action. So all these large corporations with their administrative staff that, you know, rake in millions of dollars per person salaries, they're the ones that are requiring their corporations to make the change now. And the making the change is really for their margins and their continued existence. because they can see the writing on the wall. They know things are changing. They know this is causing problems. So they're not even waiting for government mandates. They're just doing it.
Yeah, but I think it's going to take longer than that.
You have to realize that there's not a homogeneity of conservatives not wanting government involved in their business. It's actually split into multiple tiers. So the people, like the ones that have stock in Next Era, Florida Power and Light, they're going at this full bore. They spent $1 billion to put in solar panels throughout the Florida Everglades. They spent another $500 million on batteries. And they're looking to spend another $1 billion to put in place their hydrogen generation and hydrogen burning power plant on the east coast of Florida. So they're spending huge amounts of their corporate treasure chest to do this.
Yep.
So you've got to look
but
at this
they're
as
very
multiple
quiet
tiers.
because it's against the propaganda they are putting out. So they are doing, like you said, stuff that we're not seeing. They are changing because there are still people who are scientific minded in those enterprises because they want to continue those enterprises. But the propaganda is totally averse to whatever they are doing.
Well, look at two automobile companies that make internal combustion engines. Look at Stellantis, that is Chrysler, Fiat, Dodge, that kind of thing. And look at Volkswagen, that makes Porsche, Volkswagen, Audi, a number of brands. Two different approaches to doing it. Volkswagen has said, okay, we're going to have to start building electric vehicles big time. We've got to reduce,
especially because Europe is determining that they have to do, and their headquarters is in Europe. It's like all because the government there is a little bit more stronger. They govern more for the people than for the corporations. Over here is the opposite. Over here, the government governs for the corporations and who care less about people.
Okay. Now, compare that with Stellantis. Stellantis says it's impossible to make a cost-effective electric vehicle. So they're not going to.
And then when they break, who's going to pay? All of us.
Your tax dollars are going to give them a bailout, I'm sure, because they're too big to fail.
Yep.
Yeah.
They love socialism.
But much like LG thought they were in a good position with their solar panels, Volkswagen thought they were in a good position because they got the Audi e-tron. And, they've got a number of Volkswagen ID 3, 4, 5, 6. So they went into China thinking, we got this covered. And they forgot that the people in China that want to buy electric vehicles are not your grandpa. They want the latest technology. They want them stylish. They want them aerodynamic. And they want them cheap. So if you're in there with your $60,000 Audi e-tron, and meanwhile BYD is selling you a car that gets better range, looks better, has more electronics inside of it, and is, decked out in paint that looks fun to drive, you're basically going to kill off Volkswagen in China. And if you look at the first quarter sales for this year of Volkswagen in China, they dropped by more than 20% over last year. It's not because they're not selling EVs in China. They are. They would like to sell even more. They can't sell all the ones they're making because they're just not competitive. Meanwhile, Tesla can't make them fast enough, and they're extremely overpriced. But you've got the consumer cars and you've got the wealthy people's cars. And the wealthy people don't want to go drive, an internal combustion BMW, and they don't want to go drive an Audi that doesn't have all the latest electronics and can receive over-the-air updates for software and get new features unexpectedly the next morning. So learn from what happened with LG Solar. You can't just dip your toe in the water. You've got to jump in and swim. And if you don't, you may not survive. You may drown. So there's not just one kind of large corporation. There's several tiers, and some are doing it right, some are doing it not so right, and some just may never catch up, like
and
GM and Ford.
Most of the technology that we have today, I have a belief that we could go net zero not too long if we started doing it, if we started, not just in carbon, avoiding pollution, if we thought about in a form of defense of the country.
Well,
out of my soapbox.
There is a phrase that is, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I think that there's another phrase that should be created that's similar to that. Those that cannot identify an analogy when it's presented to them are doomed to suffer from that analogy. And if you look at any time a big business wants to be even bigger, they go look for a way of doing things such that they can skirt the normal process, not pay as much, and get things cheaper. Now, sometimes they'll say, that's for the benefit of the people. We're finding cheaper ways. We're bringing you Walmart or whatever. Well, let me give you an example. Back when Germany and other countries in that part of Europe had good relations with Russia, rather than developing their own energy resources, Russia said, well, we'll just build a pipeline to the edge of your country, and there you go. And we'll give you cheap natural resources. And the countries went, oh boy, we don't have to invest, and it's going to be cheap forever. And that's all they could see. So they were reliant upon Russia to provide them with their natural resources. Will war ever happen? No, of course not. So now they're seeing the consequences of this. In the case of manufacturing leaving the U.S. for other countries, yes, we went to other countries. We started with Southeast Asia, places like Vietnam, and also in South Korea and Mexico, and then big time in China. And we found places where we could get cheap labor, where we could build buildings that didn't require so much oversight and licensing and legal expertise to get it up and operating. So we basically outsourced all that to other countries. The thing you need to learn from that is, how many robots does it take to operate a high volume automobile manufacturing plant? As many as they have in Austin, Texas right now. As many as they have outside of Berlin, Germany right now. It's already been indicated that you may not see a Tesla bot available to you right now as a purchaser. There have been people that have said, I was at Giga Texas in Austin. They have 70 Tesla bots proving right now. So if you think they're not creating a very cheap labor force for manual labor, they are. And they're proving them out in the best environment they can, because they're putting them to menial tasks. I need somebody that can go grab that thing over there which weighs 70 pounds and bring it over here. You go do it. So they're being tasked with menial labor jobs that people don't want to do that. And if you do it all day, you're going to suffer from back injuries, and you're going to want vacation time and sick leave and maternity leave, and the robots won't want that. So they're already breaking in and proving out Tesla bots in Giga Texas. Now, what does that mean for the long term? Well, how do you think the Chinese are going to feel when Tesla starts bringing in Tesla bots into Giga Shanghai and displacing Chinese workers? Actually, it's not going to be a problem because those skilled laborers know how to build EVs, and they're going to go to work for the other growing Chinese automobile manufacturers like BYD because they don't have the robotics.
No, China will do the same thing we did. They'll export the labor to Vietnam.
And there's a company in Vietnam that's already doing that, saying, no, we're not going to be doing this for China. We're going to be doing this for our own wallets here in Vietnam, and then we'll export to other countries.
But that's what you get wrong, I think, Monroe. That's what you get wrong, that you think that the people of Vietnam or the companies are going to say this or do that for their interest. The thing you're missing is that it's a system. It's not a situation where the people of Germany can say, you know, we're not going to be dependent on Russian gas because it's wrong, and instead we're going to use coal when we have it, and we're going to develop electrical energy and better solar energy. It costs too much money. If it costs more money at the time they made the decision.
How much does that cell phone that you have near you cost you? Did it cost the tens of billions of dollars it took to develop the technology to deploy it? No, of course not. You didn't have to pay that. Collectively, people pay things like that. So if you need electrical power in Germany, you just need them to want to spend enough money to get the ball rolling and then start charging for the electricity, the same way they're doing for 5G cellular.
Okay, anyway, you were right about helium. The helium molecule is smaller than the hydrogen molecule, but not just because it's monatomic. Even the helium atom is smaller than the hydrogen atom because as you go from left to right across the periodic table within the same period, even though there are more electrons in the shell, because the electric charge between the protons and neutrons grows greater as you add more protons and electrons, the size of the atoms shrink. So you were right about that.
Yeah.
I did check that out. You were right.
Yeah.
But
well, the reason why I understand how small a helium atom is because in spacecraft, you have to calculate a certain percentage of your helium that you use for pressurizing your fuel tank for combustion, for your rocket fuel. You have to put in a factor of leak. You can have welded seams that the helium will go right through a welded seam if there's a nearly, atomic level gap. So yeah, helium is small. Yeah. Hydrogen.
Yeah. It's monatomic. Helium is monatomic.
Yes. Well, it's an inert gas, so it doesn't like playing with other things, whereas hydrogen likes playing with other things, usually oxygen to make water and hydrous. Have you seen the promotions for electric heat pumps? So that people can do away with fuel oil powered heating in the wintertime?
Are those the heat pumps like geothermal, or what do you mean?
No. They're just electric heat pumps. Think of it in Florida as reverse cycle AC.
We use the reverse cycle AC when they can. That's a great idea.
And they're now offering subsidies to replace your fuel oil burning heater in the wintertime with heat pumps. So when you already have an air conditioning unit that's mounted through the wall to give your apartment in New York City air conditioning, but you're still using the radiator, which is fuel oil burning, to heat, if that building says, no, everybody's just going to have to go buy, reverse cycle AC units, and I'm going to stop providing you with fuel oil-based heat.
Yeah, so, but we have to think about it that even though those are necessary, like heating inside the houses and many other things, you got to see what lies the percentile of the most use of fossil fuels. It is industry, it is concrete, and it is pecuaria. How you call it? It's just husbandry. You know, all the
Animal
kinds of
husbandry,
animals. Yeah. So this is where lies most of the use. So there are ways to do. One is like, personally, I became vegan because of health, but the consequence is that I'm now proud vegan because I'm consuming less than half of the carbon that I used to consume eating meats. And
because the carbon that you were consuming, you were not directly consuming the carbon. You were eating the product that itself, the production of that product, the delivery of it, the growth of it required a lot more carbon than you were actually consuming.
Yes, I think it's almost a quarter of the whole use is for production of meat.
Yep.
Or a little bit less than that.
I think
it is like a large part of it.
I think the two lessons to come away with are: data models are big, pay attention to them. You know, in other words, you never get something for nothing, and whatever you consume, it had to come from somewhere. So look at the big picture, look at the data associated with everything that you're interacting with. And the other thing is, business is as business does, and it's very difficult to realize that cycle after cycle after cycle, business does not change. They always look for what's cheap today that I don't have to pay the consequences for tomorrow. It's just the model. Now, if you're looking at natural resources, until human beings can consume electrons, we consume matter, and it has to come from somewhere. But everything else in our environment, we can probably get indirectly from electricity. You want heating or cooling? Well, you could burn fossil fuels for it, or the power plant could. But if the power plant's solar and you get the panels to be responsibly produced, then you're cutting down all that extra stuff along the way, and you're getting closer and closer to the ubiquitous energy source, which is electrons. So I can have a gas-powered stove in my house. Well, that's really just, I'm consuming fossil fuels directly at the end point. So I'll switch to an electric stove. But if it's an induction heater, I'm doing that very wastefully. I have to heat up the coil and the reflector in the bottom of the stove of the range element in order to heat up my pot. But if I use an inductive cooking and a pot that has inductive metal, that has conductive metal on the bottom of it, I can now heat just the bottom of the pot, saving a lot of energy. But it's by moving from something that consumes something to something that only consumes electrons. The closer we get to just consuming electrons for whatever we need, the more reduction you're going to have in it. But we've got to make sure that everything that we produce that we need, that is substance, you know, that we hold, that we eat, that we touch, that we manipulate, all those things are made from stuff that it isn't electrons. And we have to make sure that whatever it took to make it, the process it took, and the chemistry that it took, we need to look at the big picture as to how that happens. It's all connected.
Yes, I commend and applaud your perspective of the big picture. You've started your presentation with the big picture and brought it down to the nitty-gritty, the pixel level of politics and finance, corporations, but we should keep looking at the bigger picture of where we come from, what we're doing.
I'm career trained as a computer systems analyst. So whenever I see a problem or requirements, I look at it as, I'm not just going to go pinpoint and fix just that. What's the system around it? What's all the data coming in, the data going out? What are the side effects? What additional information do I need? I look at it from the big picture. And that's just me being me.
Yeah, too many times people are nitpicking at the little details when we really should get a bigger view of what.
Well, people have got a lot on their plate. If you look collectively across the population of the planet. They've got to, do something to make the money to feed their family, to raise their kids, to, do all the things that people have to do to get to the point where they can be retired like me. But, that's just the bulk of the planet has to do that. But because we have so many billion people on the planet, that doesn't mean we can't walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. There's a certain number of millions of people planet-wide that should be looking at the bigger picture. And because we're going to come in the future and go, I just noticed we're all going to die soon. Could you please fix the problem? And the people that do look at the big picture, the people that do pay more attention, I want to say are better educated, but you don't have to have a PhD to connect the dots. You have to have some basic educational background, to understand, some rudimentary chemistry and physics and science and things like that, and to know that there's cause and effect. And you can help. You can come up with solutions, because not everybody that has the PhD comes up with the solution. Sometimes it's the guy in his garage that just went, looky what I discovered. So, everybody can contribute if you just give them the opportunity.
Is it possible that as living organisms, there's something wrong with us and we're all just so greedy, looking for ourselves, fighting amongst ourselves?
No, I think it is simply vested interest. Survival is one of our keenest instincts, and survival takes on many flavors. And it could be just personal survival. It could be family survival. It could be territorial survival. It takes on a lot of levels, but it all winds up being the same thing. I need something that will make it where I can carry on, and I can carry on comfortably. And sometimes people get the wrong impression that means if I'm going to do better, you must do worse. And that's a dumb way to look at it.
Joe, that is an author that I really like his books. His name is Rutger Bregman. And his last book, he actually says that in the book that the human beings are actually slowly getting better. We are dying less of the wars. We are having less. We are dying, of less about, violence. So he's actually writes a book that's very optimistic by the individual, especially in small communities, or the incentive of each country or the culture of each country. He gives like a portrait that's not really that the individual per se that is so bad that we are greedy and we are always what he writes is like basic we're good, but the problem is the incentive or the structure that the corporations change the governments, and then the individual, because they need to put food on the plate, they are forced to do things they don't want to do. So it's not the actual individual, it's more like the people who controls the means of productions force good people do bad things. So look for, Bregman. Let me see his latest book. It's like the one that I have is Utopia for Realists. That's the one that is really good. And he came to talk on Davos, and he actually got like a big deal, like exposure, because they say like, oh, you talk about saving the planet, you're talking about this and that, but none of you wants to pay taxes. That's the basic problem. It's that you're just talking, but you're not doing anything. It's like I'm coming here, everybody's talking about fires, but nobody mentions that we need the firefighters. Something like he did like analogy that, we are talking about the fires, but nobody talks about water or, the firefighters. We just started. So it was really good. Then the other book says he did another one that talks about, that we're not individually bad, that things are getting better. Let me see the name of the book. It's the latest book. I
think you're pronouncing his name in his native tongue, as opposed to the way Americans would pronounce his name. I think his name is Rutger Bregman. Okay, but I know his first name is Rutger.
Rutger. Yeah. Well, ask Manuela to pronounce it. She's probably going to pronounce better than I do.
Yeah, just I take down the sharing, but just so you can look for him.
But there's a lot of people who are actually writing. I found the other book is Humankind. From the ones that I read is Utopia for Realists. That it's excellent. And then the one that I don't have yet is Humankind. And the way he explained the book is that we have a fix, but we need to create systems for that to actually be fulfilled.
I think it's a matter of people are too busy to be bothered. And, hundreds of years ago, many hundreds of years ago, we had no choice but to be bothered because that was how we survived. So if you think about it as the villagers that wanted to protect their village would take up arms and fight with the other village to see who controlled their village. Well, okay, we don't have to do that anymore. We have government in place, and therefore it's a volunteer army. So you're not going to die in war as likely today as several hundred years ago.
But think of it that way. Think of what's built into us to have wars, to fight the other villages. Why? It just does. It's something built into us.
No. Today, you don't get to decide whether or not the war is going to occur. Somebody else makes that decision for you, and they make that decision for you based upon their own interests, not yours.
Yeah, that's true too. But something did evolve. When you say built into us, it evolved into us. Come on. Yeah. When there were animals before there were people, some animals lived in the bushes and some animals lived in the grass, and some animals that were sleeping in the grass could hear a kind of a rustle in the bushes, and they would jump up ready to fight because they didn't want to get et, and some of them couldn't hear that well, and they would get et, and some of the ones that jumped up would jump up when there really wasn't something there. It was just the wind, and they used too much energy. So everything that came from us came from evolution originally. But so I think it's absolutely true that there's something in us.
His name is Rutger Bregman, RutgerBregman.
And then look for the synopsis. It actually says that, it's like, it's very hopeful. And he's like a historian, and he uses a lot of data. And it's like, it's not just his opinion. It's basic. He's giving you the information for you to get your opinion. And I really like it. It's like shows that if we let us as in nature, as incorporating human beings, we are actually making good.
Is there anything else regarding tonight's presentation you want to cover before I stop recording?
Somewhat related. I saw an article recently that the Amazon is transitioning from rainforest to savanna, which could be an epic disaster for the planet because it'll be much drier and all that carbon will be released from the current rainforest growth.
And you know why, right?
Well, aren't they just plowing it down to put in cattle farms?
Yes. They're plowing down to put in cattle farms and then or produce soy to give to the cattle. So it's basic soy or cattle, but that soy that they are producing is GMO, and it's for feed. It's not for real people. So it's basic the cattle industry or the foresting all over the world, including the Amazon. And the problem for the foresting in the Amazon is that it takes less than 10 years for the soil to become desertic, because what gives the nutrition of the forest is the recycle of the biomatter between the trees and the ground. And it's a very shallow nutrition layer that is not much under. And then because of the waters, everything sweeps away and you lose soil, and it's really bad. And by the way, it's a rainforest, not because the area rains a lot and you have a forest because of that. The forest, the chemical that comes out of the trees, actually, they precipitate the clouds that form the rain. So without the trees, there is no rain.
Yeah. So it's mind-boggling to me that Brazil, the government of Brazil, can continue to just allow this to happen.
You know that the government of Brazil was elected to do that.
Mind-boggling.
That they've been working in the Brazilian government since I noticed since the election of Bush 2. That's when I arrived here, and I started to learning the language they are using. And then when I saw the news on Brazil, it actually sounded like a weird Portuguese when the politicians were talking. And then I noticed they were using translation like Google Translation, and they were translating like word by word instead to be someone in Brazil who wrote whatever the politician says, and they did exactly the same strategy. So it was like so weird, because whatever you get the text of some of the politicians, whatever their arguments, whatever they did, it was the simile. Almost they didn't even change for the colloquial language, the local language. It was like weird translation, like word by word, that sometimes when I speak English and I say weird stuff, is just because I never said that in English, and I'm translating word by word, and it sounds strange.
Yeah, it just surprised me to no end, seeing that British Petroleum wanted to be out of the petroleum business by 2050 completely.
And in my opinion, we already have the capacity and the technology to get faster going into neutral. I'm not even.
Oh yeah, I mean we'll always need petroleum products for materials and for manufacturing and for lubricants, but we don't need to consume it for fuels.
No, we don't. We already have technology to go neutral. But we didn't even start developing anything of that. For people like us, that we're starting to feel the consequences right now with, prices and, all the difficulties that, those changes causes. This is immediate for people who have, are not rich. But the really wealthy people, they will not feel the consequences. So I don't think anything will change anytime soon.
I think the next time we'll notice a paradigm shift that is enthusiastically allowed rather than tariffed is when automobile electric vehicle makers in China and Vietnam start wanting to import their products into the US, and they'll be able to sell you an electric vehicle that's a comfortable small SUV, or maybe in the $30,000 range. And that will just be intolerable competition to all the entrenched internal combustion engine car companies.
And they will do the most to stop it.
Yes. Well, they'll ask the government, is there any way you can take that $30,000 car and add a $30,000 tariff to it?
Yeah.
Because we don't want those inferior quality foreign cars in our U.S.
And don't you think they already have the technology in their patents hidden somewhere?
No, because
the technology to you know, for many things.
No,
I bet that
it's because there is an upstart company that came in and created a lot of the technology needed for electric vehicles, and they patented everything they could, but they're not going to charge you for use of the patent so long as you admit publicly where you got it from, and they're not doing that. So when you look at things like the octapump on the Tesla Model 3 and Model Y, that is invention beyond belief in technology, that you can have that many things all done through one thing that's the size of a round loaf of bread.
Well, sorry, I'm not familiar with the octapump. What is the octapump?
Okay, in an electric vehicle, you're producing heat from the batteries. You're producing heat from the motors. You have to cool the cabin of the car. You need all these temperatures and fluids, and you'd like to balance one to the other, but you don't want to have a separate air conditioning system and a separate battery cooling system and a separate motor cooling system. You want one solution that just takes the heat from where you don't want it and puts it to where you do want it. And that's what the octapump does on a Model 3 and a Model Y. It's this thing that has, 8 different exchangers on it, and it all plugs into one thing. And because Ford, GM, Chrysler, VW, they see this as, 8 different systems, and they outsource it to 8 different companies, and they don't connect together. They can't make a product with that level of efficiency. And the other thing to think about is if you had 8 things and now you only need one thing, that makes the vehicle a lot less expensive and faster to manufacture. So they'll have that advantage. And when it comes to companies in China wanting to follow Tesla, those companies in China have no problem either stealing the intellectual property and just using it, or they're willing to say, yeah, we got this from Tesla. Don't we make great cars? So I think that there's going to be tariff means of barring these better cars from making it to the U.S. marketplace. And that's very much akin to, imagine if when Toyota and Honda first entered the U.S., they entered the U.S. with vehicles that are as cost effective and as reliable and high quality as they are today. We would have tariffed them into oblivion. We can't displace our entrenched, thick margin, not doing anything to progress anything, company and players with these other solution providers. And that's what's going to happen is when an electric car company like BYD comes into the U.S., they're not going to come in with a little like golf cart boxy piece of junk. They're going to come in with something that looks like, an Audi e-tron, but is half the price, has twice the electronics capability on it, and self-driving. And why wouldn't you want to buy that? Well, because there's a $30,000 tariff on it. Why do you need that? It's to keep out them foreign vehicles. Why? Because they're low quality? No, because they hurt our entrenched players. I can see it happening. And it's going to happen either this year or next year.
And the other things that we don't mention enough is like, especially for people who live here in Florida, there's no public transportation to mention here. Mm-hmm. Maybe because I was working in Miami, there was a little bit better public transportation. But even though the way that people see public transportation here is that just poor people who uses public transportation. It has a bad stigma, thing that I have never seen in other places where I visit or lived. And it is like other countries, public transportation is a necessity, especially because they're old cities. You cannot have that many cars going into monuments were constructed 2,000 years ago. You need public transportation to avoid destroying your patrimony. And all the countries that you have that's public transportation is better because, you know, better, faster transport. It's like, that's, you find the poorest people and the richest people using the same cart, the same transport, the same everything. And over here, it is so elitist. And the funny thing is that everyone pays for the road, but not everyone uses the road. And then when you use the road using public transportation, you're looking like, or you're retired, you lost your driver's license, or you're a child, or you have a disability and you cannot use your own car, and you look like you're out of the system, that you're poor, you're dummy, or you're something. It's like a bad thing for you to talk about transportation, especially here in Florida. In some other places, even in the United States, people that I know that don't even have driver's license, they look at me, do you drive? I would just, yes, I drive. Yeah, I live in Florida. Oh, kind of.
Well, I think what you're going to find is the reasons why people own vehicles is because point-to-point transportation, and it's private. They don't like paying for the vehicle. They don't like paying for the fuel. They don't like paying for the insurance. But they can't get away from the, I want to go where I want to go, when I want to go, and I want to go without having to deal with other people. Either other people in the vehicle with me that I don't know, or the person driving the vehicle with me that I don't know about them. So later this year, you're going to see the Tesla Robotaxi. And the Robotaxi, if you've ever seen the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, Total Recall, the Johnny Cab, minus the animated puppet, it is going to be something that holds maybe 6 people. Think of it like a Tesla Model Y without steering wheel, without pedals, without rear view mirror, without side view mirrors, and instead of having seats that, you know, face front where, you know, passengers and drivers can be, you might have 3 seats in the back, 3 seats in the front facing each other, and a console on one side wall, and you just tell it where you want to go, probably on your mobile phone. It arrives, and on a display on the outside it says, Robotaxi is here for and you. And then you get in, it takes you to your destination, and you get out. And if you don't think this model is going to be something people are going to eat up, have you ever heard of Lyft and Uber? Now, what's the negative thing about Lyft and Uber? You got a driver. Well, what happens if you can get rid of the driver and still have all the other benefits? I want to go where I want to go, when I want to go. I want it to be private, and I want it to just work.
And you can actually choose like shared or no, just for me.
No,
and pay
no shared.
No?
No shared. Private.
Private, okay.
Maximum 6 passengers. Oh, you got 12 people in your party. Order up 2 of them. Because I think
they're going to end up doing shared too.
They used to have jitney services, like it was like a nickel, you know, and you know, when people didn't buy cars, and the auto industry got rid of the jitney services, which was
in California. In California, the red bus, they basically financially, using government action, drove them out of business.
Right.
Because they were competing with gasoline-powered cars. We can't have that. Well, when the Robotaxi shows up, and it's the thing that people want out of Uber and Lyft, minus all the negatives, it's going to become very popular very quickly. And when you
nobody will buy cars anymore.
No. When you want one, you're not going to go buy a Robotaxi for $25,000 or $30,000. You won't be able to buy one. Tesla will lease to a company a population of Robotaxis. And so, you know, you might be creating what is the next generation of a taxi cab company minus the taxi cab drivers, and using electricity for fuel instead of gasoline. So maintenance costs lower, fuel costs lower, personnel costs lower. Everything just crashes through. And because we have autonomous driving and Tesla will insure you, insurance costs are lower. So they're going to create a financial model that is going to make it where you're going to question, why do I need to own a vehicle?
Because we need to transport telescopes.
No. If you build a vehicle that holds 6 people and has either a hatch or double doors on the side of it, I can fit my telescope in there with me. That's not going to be a problem. And since it's an autonomously driven vehicle, it'll go anywhere a car will go. So if I need to go out to Everglades Holiday Park, I can call up a robo-taxi to do that.
I saw a video of somebody testing this Tesla self-driving technology, and the Tesla kept stopping at a spot on the street where there was a red sign on the side of a building. The Tesla thinking that the red sign was a stop sign, which it wasn't. And then it would stop
would you rather have it do that?
In unpredictable spots.
Would you rather have it do that?
Quite ready.
Would you rather have it do that or ignore an emergency vehicle with a flashing red light?
But that's not the right question. Obviously, we know the answer to that. The question is, can the technology be developed to the extent that somebody who's wearing a red T-shirt isn't going to have the car stopping every time it goes by on the sidewalk, right? Obviously, we aren't going to want Tesla to say, probably it's not a stop sign. We're just going to run through it. The question is, can the technology be developed sufficiently for, I think, Elon Musk was interviewed about it, and he said, what, you mean where like they paint a tunnel on the side of a building so it looks like a tunnel, like a Wile E. Coyote thing, and we'll have to be able to distinguish whether it goes through there or somebody's wearing a T-shirt with a stop sign?
I think it's a false narrative. I think it's just a way of creating it to say, you don't want this. It's scary. It's gonna change things. And
from what I've seen of the technology, it's almost ready for prime time.
Almost, yes.
Almost ready.
How good does it have to be? Does it have to be better than the people that kill people on the highway today? It's already there.
Yeah. No, I think it's almost ready for prime time. I'm not saying almost ready for prime time next week, but maybe next year. I think it's close to that. It's just that depending on the state that you live, the permissions and the licenses.
No, Florida's already approved it. Yep. By the way, autonomous driving has already been approved in Florida.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. You know why? Because
Truckers.
GM petitioned to have it done.
Yeah, truckers are they're building trucks for self-driving trucks now.
Yeah, but it was General Motors that petitioned the state of Florida to get that passed. Because General Motors has Super Cruise in their Cadillacs, and the moment they released those from the factory, they didn't want any stinking Florida regulations that would get in the way of people buying them and using them. The problem is they're GPS fenced.
Do GPS stinks?
No, fenced.
I guess
there's only certain places you can take your GM vehicle and it will know how to drive, because it's an area that's already been mapped out and programmed into the car. Whereas the Tesla autonomous driving, their full self-drive, which is not full self-drive, their autonomous driving is literally take it anywhere you want. As long as it understands where the roads are, it'll try and figure out the rest of it, just like a person. So if you read the fine print in the law that the governor recently signed regarding their exclusion zone for Disney, they have until the middle of next year to negotiate this. Disney just assumed all of the responsibility for those infrastructure services and products and did not charge the state of Florida for them. As I mentioned with the efforts to improve habitability of the planet by using the systems that were there to suit your own benefit. I did that this week. The STEM or STEAM programs in Broward County.
Yes.
I realized, well, why isn't there something about astronomy in that? Because I know there's a section on science, and there kind of is. And for all the money that Broward County spent to have full-time employees as naturalists at Broward County parks, and to offer things like $5 walks in the woods and $5 sort of hay rides and that kind of stuff, there is no conformance to the space science requirements of the Florida STEM program.
It's basic. Just
wait a minute. Wait a minute. They've got an observatory at Markham Park. Doesn't that count? No, because they don't have anything educational in place. So back when Helen and I, and occasionally Les, were providing education at the observatory, that would have been applicable to the Florida STEM commitment.
Yeah, but the thing
what they're doing now, just talking and looking in a telescope or looking at a computer display, doesn't qualify.
Yeah, but even though, Monroe, it's like it wasn't the county, because when we were there doing that, that was an initiative of the county. That was an initiative
remember there was one event where the Markham naturalist attempted to work with us for an event. And the reason why is so she could do some STEM points.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. But when it looked like it was, oh my God, now she's going to have to know all about, astronomy as opposed to nature, that stopped after one event. And now I'm looking at it as, oh, maybe this is our door means of starting to do events at Everglades Holiday Park. We could be the county's outsourced vendor to increase their STEAM conformance for space science.
Yeah.
Because right now it's a big gap in their programs in the county.
Yeah, going back to the subject of the evening, one thing I thought was always insane was the fact that we couldn't have little small windmills on our houses. I mean, my fan on my back porch floats in the wind all the time. So, but
Florida Public Service Commission, dual metering.
Yeah, they don't want you to have that.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, the other thing is, if you wanted to put solar panels on the roof of your house, and you had a larger, let's say, a 4-bedroom, 3-bath size house, you could put enough solar panels where you would have more than enough electricity to cover all your needs. So what are you going to do with the excess? Well, I'd like to save it to my neighbors. I'll just have the electrician run a cable over to their house and have them put in batteries, and I can provide them with electricity. The Florida Public Service Commission will say, no, that makes you a utility, and you're going to be governed directly.
Oh, my goodness. So, Monroe, it's 1:47.
I know.
And we're still recording. This is going to take me forever to edit down.
I think I better go. And I got to go to work tomorrow.
Oh,
okay. Are we done? I guess we're done.
I think so. That's going to be a long edition.
Somebody
bye, guys.
Good night, everyone.
Happy birthday, delayed.
Good night, y'all.
Good night.
Good night.